back to PsychFM. Today we are here with clinical psychologist Maximillian Chen and a special guest, Dr. Sheau.
So I'm Max, I'm a clinical psychologist, been working for 8 years now. I see mainly adults and some teens as well.
Hi, I'm Sheau. I'm a psychiatrist by training and also do a training in aviation medicine. Used to work for the Singapore Armed Forces, but have been visiting consultant with the Singapore General Hospital Department of Psychiatry over the past 12 years. So special interest is in sleep medicine. I also see general psychiatry for adults.
Okay, thank you both for that introduction. So for today, as we all know, we're going to be talking all about sleep. And it's a very interesting topic. We know that sleep is actually a very important part of our routine and it's very important in our lives. And we all have a very different understanding of how sleep works or how sleep functions. So maybe to kick things off, Max, would you like to share more about how sleep works?
Yeah, sure, definitely, absolutely. So we Singaporeans are amongst the most sleep deprived in the world. Most of us say we want 7 hours of sleep, but maybe like only a quarter of us actually get that 7 hours of sleep. Most of us actually get about 4 to 6 hours of sleep, and that's not a good thing because sleep is actually really crucial for our mental and our physical health. Right? When we are chronically sleep deprived, that's going to lead to us with problems with weight gain, memory problems, thinking and concentration problems as well. Being chronically sleep deprived also definitely affects our immunity. So sleep is something we all want more of, but we can't get enough of. Sleep is actually quite a complex thing. It kind of proceeds in stages.
N1 to 3 and then REM.
And then REM sleep. Okay, right. So N1 to 3 and then REM sleep. So in N1 sleep also, that's where we start kind of dozing off. In N2 sleep, the brain and the body's activity starts to slow down a little bit more. Then N3, also known as deep sleep, that's when our brain and our body slows down even more and plays a big role in recuperating our body's energy and managing our kind of mental health as well. And then of course there's the famous REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, right, where basically the brain's activity starts up a little bit more again, and that's when we start having these dreams. And studies have found that dreams play a big part in also helping us to kind of sort out the information in our mind. So sleep is a very complex thing. It's something that we can't get enough of, and while we sometimes say like sleep is for the weak, I think on the contrary, the lack of sleep actually makes us weak.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, just to jump in here, most people don't realize that we spend 1/3 of our lives in sleep. And sleep, on the contrary, is actually a very active process. And we think that sleep, during sleep, you're just flat out and chill, nothing happens. But it's actually a very active process. Like what Max mentioned earlier, in the different stages of sleep, generally, if you look at the number of sleep cycles that we get, you will find that in the first half of the night, that's where more of the deeper sleep happens. In the second half of the night is where the dream sleep, more of it happens. And both have their important functions, right? So we say deep sleep, that's where the body really goes into deep, almost hibernation-like. But that's actually when most of the physical repair occurs. So lots of changes in the hormone levels, growth hormones get released, cellular repair occurs, immunity functions get boosted during that period. And then in the second half of the night is where more of the dream sleep occurs, and that's where the mind actually try to repair itself. So dream sleep, as I have spoken many times during public education, I use the analogy of dream sleep like a process that occurs in the old days when we were using computers with spinning hard drives. And if you recall, when we were using those kind of computers, over time it slows down and sometimes even hang. And then very often we have to perform a function called disk maintenance, and during which they do disk defragmentation, where they reorganize all the data that is stored, keeping and organizing information or data that we want to keep in a nice order so that's easier to retrieve, making space for new data to be stored easily. Right? So similarly, in dream sleep, that is what's happening, and the memory of the day gets organized during dream sleep, so that all the rubbish things that we do not want to remember gets chucked out, maybe presenting itself as a weird dream. And then important memory could be content, could be sensory, can be emotional memory, and then they get parked in the relevant parts of the brain, in the hippocampus and so on. So it is a complex, active process.
Yeah, absolutely.
are there any good sleep habits that someone should engage in to maybe reduce the risk of getting insomnia?
Absolutely. So there's a whole wide range of behavioral practices and environment, setting up your sleep environment as well, that we call sleep hygiene. Basically, sleep hygiene is like a category of practices that keep our sleep healthy, right? So I think one of the more important ones would be having a regular sleep schedule, right? So it's always going to sleep at about the same time, waking up at the same time on the weekdays and the weekends as well.
So basically our human activities runs on what we call the circadian rhythm, body clock. So there's a specific timing for certain activities to occur physiologically and physically. Right. So if, like what Max mentioned, if you end up having very bad sleep routines, you end up confusing your own clock and you end up having trouble getting the signal for you to get to sleep. So having a regular sleep routine is important. And there's also other aspects to sleep hygiene. Lots of people nowadays, because of various requirements, social pressure, work matters, end up preoccupying themselves at bedtime, thinking about problems. They do not actually get protected time for themselves to wind down, ending up overthinking or thinking about things that during a time when they're supposed to be trying to get to sleep. So that can actually cause anxiety and so on. And also other habits that can potentially interfere with sleep in this modern society. Nowadays lots of people like to have an active lifestyle, and they end up going gymming, exercising late into the night, and then you get overstimulated, or they end up having intermittent fasting, go to bed hungry. Have you tried sleeping when you're hungry? It's difficult, right? Yeah. Because the body is under stress, so it's difficult. So a lot of these modern day practices do affect sleep to some extent. And then of course there's this big hype about getting onto devices. The popular thing to believe is this blue light, bright light, everything from your devices. But I think if you compare the amount of light actually being emitted from the device to what is actually occurring in the content coming out from the device, personally I feel the latter is more important.
Yeah.
Because it's not so much of the light, because actually it's very minute. Physiologically, I'm not sure how big the impact is, but rather what is each individual trying to do on the devices, right? They may be playing games, following some K-drama, they get hooked and they need to chase after each episode, or reading some emotionally intense or mentally stressful content, right? That ends up they don't get opportunity to actually wind down.
I think a lot of my patients, they use their phone, social media as a way to like distract themselves from their thoughts. You talked about like how we sometimes go to sleep and we still have a lot of racing thoughts, and some people don't really know how to kind of turn that part of their mind off. And a lot of us tend to use like our phones, social media, just kind of doom scrolling as a way to just quiet down the mind, to feel like at peace in your mind. But I think similarly to what you're saying, nowadays when I spend time online, I feel more stressed than calm, which is totally not the right state for us to be in when we are trying to sleep.
So the choice of content is important.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I think what we end up reaching for is social media, news, the kind of thing that is just easy for us to just keep moving our thumb up on. Yeah, I think you mentioned also a really good thing about having a wind down routine. Also, just having this kind of time, protected time prior to your bedtime, going through the same routines that help you to wind down. It starts to kind of start the process for you for your whole kind of mental activity to slow down also.
How do we navigate around technology, given that we live in a tech-centric era? So technology phones are something that we will still go back to.
Actually, I might disagree with the whole idea that it's impossible for us to not have our phones when we go to bed. I think whenever I ask patients or my clients also what they actually need your phone in bed for, then they will say alarm. That's the only thing they actually kind of need it for, right? And alarms in the old days were just a little thing, right? Nowadays they're quite like high-tech alarms alarms, and this is actually something I do for myself also. My phone doesn't come into my bedroom at night, and it's something that my wife and I have been doing for maybe about the last few years or so. Actually, surprisingly, it wasn't that hard to get used to the point where now, if we're going to sleep and somehow the phone sneaks its way into the room, we feel a bit like something's off, and we'll bring it back out to where we normally charge our phones. So for us, we have an alarm clock that's a little bit more high-tech. You can set an alarm, it has a light that slowly brightens, getting to the time for us to wake up. I don't know how helpful that is, but it's something that I found really helpful. And yeah, it's doing those things to wind down, reading, also doing some kind of deep breathing, meditation, gentle stretching, progressive muscle relaxation. Those are things that are really helpful for us to really slow things down.
Tech is a double-edged sword. Yes, most things are. Personally, I feel that if the whatever tech you're using is not affecting your sleep, by all means go ahead. But if you are starting to get problems, then it's time to figure out what exactly is the issue. Now, the tech part causing problems, how to avoid, then the issue actually comes back down to developing good habits and having the discipline to follow that habit. Right? Because all these things about revenge bedtime, procrastination, chasing after things, all this is got to do with habits and discipline. So if you have a problem, you have to address the problem, and that is really take a lot of self-motivation to want to solve your own problem. Yeah, so that's the biggest thing I find. But of course, that alone is challenging, and getting people to be motivated and committed to changing habits that are affecting them adversely. So I think that's the main difference.
I think it's really important that we find out what's affecting us, and even the habits that work for us individually are different from person to person.
Correct. Yeah.
So when we are trying to fix our sleep, these kind of habits we build for ourselves, we want to experiment with what works for us. Also, try out something new. Try it out for maybe a week or so. Don't try it out for one night or then declare it doesn't work. So try it out, and then once we set the habits right, once we set the routines right, there are real long-term benefits for us.
Yeah, another example is that nowadays, based on tech, lots of people are using smart devices, sleep tracking devices. So is it good or is it bad? Well, some people may say it's good because I get feedback about how I'm doing, to get the motivation to keep to a certain habits or practices, and then they get very happy that their sleep is doing well. On the other hand, if you don't know yourself, a very anxious type of person, or those who are very rigid or obsessional, and they are chasing after numbers, and if I don't get 7 hours or not enough deep sleep, I'm doing badly, and then they get anxious, and then which then becomes counterproductive because they start getting problems falling asleep because they're anxious that am I going to do well tonight? Not. This goes on in a vicious cycle. So that's another example of tech being a double-edged sword. It can be good, it can be bad, but you need to know who you are using it for, how it's being used.
Yeah. I think that's what we talk about. So just experimenting, because the tech can definitely make us get quite perfectionistic about our sleep, and that's just stressful.
Yeah.
If you are lying in bed for 15-20 minutes, you haven't been able to fall asleep, it's usually more helpful to get out of bed, go somewhere else, do something calming and relaxing. The ultimate aim is still for you to get back to bed. But a problem with staying in bed when we are not sleeping and then just tossing and turning, it makes the bed more like a place of stress rather than a place of rest.
Yeah, I always use the Pavlov conditioning, and in sleep medicine we call this stimulus control therapy, because if you're like tossing and turning in bed too long, right, you end up getting higher arousal because of the stress, the anxiety of not being able to get back to sleep, right? So in Pavlov conditioning, if you have heard about this experiment by this scientist where he had the dog as a subject, right? So in this experiment, the Pavlov brought up a plate of food to feed the dog, right? The dog sees the food by reflex. What happens physiologically? And they start to salivate, right? In the part 2 of the experiment, he brought up the plate of food, rings a bell. When the dog sees the food, what happens? By reflex, it salivates. And then finally, in the last part, right, he did not bring up any food, he only rang the bell. And what happens to the dog? By reflex, it salivates because it has started to associate the ringing of the bell with arrival of food. So it's an instinct, it's a reflex. So similarly, if you bring this across, if you're lying in bed and you're tossing and turning and not sleeping, after a while, you start to associate the bedroom, the bed with the lack of sleep. not being able to get to sleep. So like what Max mentioned earlier is that if you are finding that you have problem getting back to sleep after 10-15 minutes. Oh, by the way, another deadly sin of insomnia is clock watching. So if you are lying in bed 10-15 minutes of, obviously please don't check the clock, estimate, because if you keep watching the clock, you're going to end up getting more anxious. So estimate 10-15 minutes, can't get back, get out of that environment. So you break that association with the environment that's seemingly not conducive to sleep. Yeah. So over time, you're gonna keep doing this, and once you have broken that association, then it's probably much easier later on to resume sleep. Then of course, if it continues to persist, then perhaps it's time to really figure out what is happening, because commonly if someone who has problem staying asleep, there's a higher likelihood that they may be suffering from primary sleep disorder, example sleep apnea or periodic limb movement disorder, some other things.
I think coming back to conditioning also and managing your mind's kind of associations with the bed, it's another cardinal sin for managing your sleep is doing other things besides sleep in your bed. So if you are like on your phone playing games, doing work on your bed, we end up building those kind of associations a bit. Or bed is a place for having fun, bed is a place for doing work, which is all counterproductive to our sleep. So as far as possible, we want to be keeping our bed for sleep.
Yeah, so there have been studies before that, for example, if you lose sleep for one full night, which is 8 hours of sleep, it does not mean that sleep additional 8 hours, you get that performance back. You don't get back to square one. Very often, recovery from a sleep debt takes days. It's not just something that you can make up by pure numbers. So for example, we used to do overnight calls in the hospital, right? 36 hours shift. Right. So the next day, we'll just sleep extra 2-3 hours. So long and short is, you got to listen to your body. Even if you try very hard, in fact, it's counterproductive to try to sleep more, try to go to bed earlier when your body just doesn't feel ready to get to bed. Yeah. So the harder you try, the more anxiety you get. In fact, you'll be worse off. Right. So sleep recovery actually happens over a period of few days. So on average, most people would require 2 to 3 days to be fully back to their start state. And the other thing about sleep debt is that, as mentioned earlier, you got to listen to your body, right? Sometimes the harder you try to catch up on sleep, you actually end up feeling worse. For example, on weekends, off work, off days, you try and catch a nap and you don't normally do so. Many people will find that after the nap, actually I feel more tired. I'm not sure if you have that feeling before. So when you're sleeping out of your usual cycle, right, you don't necessarily end up performing better. So that's what I've been seeing. So caffeine, actually when we talk about caffeine use, caffeine is actually a chemical that ends up blocking one of the receptors in the brain, which is the adenosine related. So we know that the longer we stay awake, adenosine levels in the brain are built up, and that causes sedation, the feeling of sleepiness. So caffeine actually blocks the receptor for this adenosine. Now the problem with brain is plasticity, right? And all the receptors will adapt, right? And then of course the receptors, based on individual, there are individual sensitivities. So some people are more sensitive to caffeine, some people are not. So take for example, I can have a big cup of coffee and still fall asleep at bedtime, right? So to me it's useless. Similarly, someone who is a chronic, coffee enthusiast, right? So they try all sorts of different coffee, few cups a day. Over time, the receptor also get adapted and desensitized. So for certain types of people, that may also not lead to any problems per se. But if you know that you are sensitive, then you probably know when you should start avoiding. So again, back to knowing yourself.
Listening to your
There's
body.
no really hard and fast rule. So if you already have a sleep problem, why give yourself another challenge, right? Yeah. So that's just common sense.
Yeah, I think so many of us, we get caught in this type. We have a sleep problem, we need to wake up, we drink coffee. And then we need to continue working into the night, you need to stay awake, drink coffee. And then that is just a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
I think sleep is something really complex, it's something really important to us. And I think too often people are like, if I'm busy, I want to stay productive, I sleep less. But that actually in the long run is not helpful.
Okay, for me just a joke. Don't give up on your dreams, keep sleeping.
Actually, like that, don't give up on your dreams, keep sleeping. That's gonna be the motto.
I have a t-shirt I always wear to public talks.
That's actually very helpful.
Yeah.
So I guess thank you once again, Dr. Sheau and Max, for sharing your insights to sleep and actually how people can actually use these suggestions and tips, because I think many people struggle with sleep. They always think it's a luxury item, and once it's taken away, it's like, what do I do with it? So thank you so much for your time and for sharing what recommendations can be taken to our audience.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
All right.